Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to One-on-One Nightly, presented, of course, by WFUV Sports. I'm Chris Persianen here with Mike Calamari and, of course, Alex Woles putting everything together behind the scenes. We're here tonight from 8:30 to 10 live on YouTube and Twitter to talk about the MLB, the NBA, the NFL, general sports news, notes, analysis. You know how it is here on One-on-One Nightly, just an hour and a half of fun sports coverage brought to you, as always, by WFUV Sports. I'm joined today by Mike Calamari. It's a nice day for baseball, Mike. It's the season. You know, we're getting started back up. The Mets are playing right now. Matter of fact, it's the top of the fifth. They're playing the Philadelphia Phillies over in Queens. They're up 2-0. So welcome news for Mets fans like myself, but just wanted to check in on how you're doing baseball wise before we get into the show. How you feeling about this new season? You excited? You talk to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great time to be a baseball fan. Last week I wore the Yankee hat and didn't have great luck. Yankees have been in a bad stretch of games, so I tried to switch it up. I got the Dodgers hat on now, but it's definitely a great time to be a fan of baseball in New York. The Yanks aren't doing too great, but the Mets, on the other hand, have some excitement around the team, and it's going to be a lot of fun to talk about them.
For sure. I think both teams have had an interesting start to the season. I'm of the opinion, and maybe it's just the New York sports fan in me, but bias aside, I really think both of these teams can get on the right track here this season and put together some pretty productive seasons, do well in regards to their divisions, and just have a good year. So the Mets here, you know, that they've actually just allowed a run. So they're only up 2-1 now to Philadelphia. The story of the season so far for the Mets has seemed to be their inability to have run support. It seems to be a problem for them consistently. Great pitching, you know, from DeGrom and now from the other options in the rotation, it isn't an issue, but capitalizing on those opportunities seems to be tough for them. You know, coming into today's game against Philadelphia, the Mets didn't have a single player hitting over 240 besides Brandon Nimmo. Nimmo, of course, has been great these first couple games, but, you know, him hitting 435 and everyone else hitting under 240 is just not where you'd like to be as a team. So just to get things started in regards to the Mets, the baseball team of New York over in Queens, I know they're dealing with some injuries in their rotation, but in regards to the other aspects of their team, how are you feeling about them, especially as the season goes on, in terms of how they can just bring the run support for guys like DeGrom?
Yeah, I'm a little optimistic. You know, certain guys are really thriving, Brandon Nimmo, like you said, but we're still waiting on some of the better hitters in the lineup, Francisco Lindor, Pete Alonso, to step it up. So when those guys really start to get the bats going, I think then you're really going to be excited with the product that's going to be on the field. And that will come later in the season. But what you like to see is guys like DeGrom, which we knew were going to come out and dominate, and especially Stroman, who's been excellent this season. Having those two guys be great has been a really, really good stepping stone for the Mets. So you got to be confident if you're a Met fan. The bullpen problems are without a doubt there. But that does not mean that you still can't be a good team, especially in the NL East. I think that when the bullpen comes around and then hopefully when the bats start to heat up, they might be a real problem in that division.
Right. We saw the Mets play 2 games yesterday against the Phillies, had a doubleheader here in Queens at Citi Field, won the first game in the 8th inning, 4-3. Of course, we have the shortened games when we do have doubleheaders, only 7-inning games, but a 3-3 tie at the end of the 7th prompted an 8th inning. The Mets were able to score a run, win that first one 4-3. The second game, a bit more impressive showing from New York. They pitched a shutout 4-0 in the second win against Philadelphia. Did those 2 games provide a signal to you for the team, a signal of hope? You know, as you said, you did have some optimism. For me personally, I was watching those games, and the first game had me nervous. Man, the first game that, especially, it was tied there at the end. As I said, I'm a Mets fan, so that's not a game that I'm watching impartially. But that game had me nervous. It felt like the Mets had themselves in not as good of a position as they should have been throughout the entire contest. It just felt like the play deserved to represent or be represented differently by the score. However, they were able to pull it out by the end in typical Mets fashion, of course, giving everyone a near heart attack in the process. The second win, much more smooth. The team really got things rolling, and that second game had me feeling a little more confident in the squad. Stroman looked great. He's incredibly fun to watch. That might be a black Stroman jersey. Might be in the cards, Mike. It's looking like it with the way that guy plays, and just the not dominance, but it was a pretty unfair game. It was well played by the Mets. It provided some confidence in regards to my doubts in their abilities to provide run support to their pitchers. I don't know how do you feel about those two wins yesterday against Philadelphia?
Yeah, I think you're definitely feel good about those wins. I think it's nice to see the Mets win a close one, especially that late in the game, because I mean, in past years, even this year, they're notorious for blowing late leads and for losing games that are all tied up going into the ninth. So a win like that always needs to motivate you if you're a Met. And like I said earlier, especially with guys on the team that you're still waiting to start hitting, like Jeff McNeil, a guy you rely on for average, hitting below 200 this year. Michael Conforto, another guy below 200. So when you got guys like that aren't hitting, and then you can squeeze out a win like that, that's always got to make you feel good. It does really flare up some problems, though. You still have to iron out some things, especially with that bullpen, like I mentioned earlier. Guys like Trevor May have not performed as great as you wish you would have, especially when you bring in a guy like that. He was your lefty reliever that you really hoped would have come in and get you to the ninth or close to there with a lead. So that is remained to be seen. So I think those things you really want to address if you're a Met fan or if you're in the front office, but you still got to feel confident. And then, like you said, to come out of the next game and to shut them out is definitely impressive. So it's definitely a confidence booster, but you'll learn a lot from the game. And I think that's what the Mets hopefully will do from here on out.
Right. In regards to McNeil, who you brought up, I think you're right to say that they need more out of him. However, I don't think I'm too worried myself. I think he's getting a little unlucky, to be honest. And he's just, he's someone who you can count on for that production. He is hitting very poorly to start the year. I think it's tough though to get in a groove when you play 5 games in 12 days. So, a strange scheduled start due to COVID delayed games might have contributed to a rocky start for guys like McNeil. I'm impressed by someone like Alonso bringing a more patient approach to the plate. Again, Alonso, someone else you brought up as someone that the team might be looking at to bring them some more production. I think that might come as the season progresses and he's able to get in a bit more of a groove. Again, the schedule has just been weird to start out the year. So these guys are talented, and I don't think it's unfair to just be on the side of thinking that they can put it together. The Mets are also waiting on, Syndergaard, Carrasco, these guys to come back healthy. Their rotation can be really scary when they do get those guys back. Just, man, DeGrom, Syndergaard, Stroman, you've got this plethora of talented pitchers on your roster. I don't know if it'll be enough, though. I don't know. It'll be tough. What do you think?
Yeah, I think a guy like Seth Lugo is another person that's going to come back and be a good arm out of the pen for the Mets. And you mentioned Syndergaard earlier. Hopefully you get him back and he's throwing strikes. That's always a big question mark with Syndergaard. But I do think that there are a lot of positive with this Mets team. I think another is Dominic Smith. I mean, He was the kind of guy that was really good for the Mets when they had the option of a DH. That, of course, was taken away after the shortened season last year. So there were many question marks on where you fit a guy in like that. Well, he would bat. He's in left now. He's playing a lot of left field. Originally a first baseman, really, but since Alonso there and you lose the DH, he's going to be playing left more. And he's been pretty good there, and his bat showed in the last couple of games with the homer. So I think that is really promising for the Mets, and they're starting to put it all together. We're really short into the season, so a lot can go wrong, especially if you're a Met fan, you know that. But there is optimism, and I think when you start to get guys back from injury, hopefully you stay healthy, and then the Mets should be a team that can contend for the wild card. I think the division's asking for a lot, but if everyone's healthy and then the guys like Lindor and McNeil get back on track, then they're going to be a team to be feared.
For sure. I mean, the Mets payroll finally looking like it is going to be mirroring the payroll of the other baseball team that we are going to be touching on right about now, which is the crosstown rival New York Yankees. Steve Cohen, new ownership. It's looking like the Queens side of things might finally be bringing a legitimate payroll to the table, a real desire to put together a winning roster. Frankly, I think they can do it. I think maybe after this season, another off season of improvement, this Mets team can really put together a great squad. For this season, however, I'm excited to see what they can do. I do think they can still hopefully break, 90 wins despite the bit of a slower start than some were expecting. Again, 5 games in 12 days. I think they'll be all right. I do want to get to the crosstown Yankees, as I mentioned. Another team, with a slower start, just flat out, how concerned are you about this start for the Yankees?
As a fan, it's frustrating to say the least. I think as a Yankee fan, you're expecting them to come out opening day and be a team that's going to be one of the best in the division. I don't think any Yankee fan expected Boston to be on a 9-game winning streak and at top of the AL East. But outside of that, I think Cole has shown a lot of good things for the Yankees. When he's on the mound, they're dominant. He's 2-0 in 3 starts. He's given up 3 runs and 12 hits and 18 1/3 innings pitched. So he has no question been dominant. It's just everything around Garrett Cole that's the problem with the Yankees. The other starters combined for a record of 1-4. They've allowed 28 runs and 48 hits in 36 innings. So that's a serious problem if you're in the Yankee ownership or if you're Aaron Boone, to fix the problems surrounding Garrett Cole. And then usually the pitching has always been a problem for the Yankees, but when you see the bats not coming alive and you're getting shut out by teams, that's a big problem. I mean, guys, outside of Aaron Judge, the lineups really struggled. There's 5 guys hitting over 250 and only 4 of them are everyday starters. So that's a really big problem for the Yankees right now. You're not hitting with guys in running scoring position. You're grounding into double plays, first and second, 1 out. These are really big problems that I think the Yankees will hopefully work to solve throughout the year. The hitting, I think, will come to pass, but the pitching is starting to look concerning. Last week I was on the show and I was saying the hitting is more of a problem, but when you see these pitchers get really lit up by these teams like the Blue Jays, it gets concerning. The Orioles, when they're hitting our pitching, that's when the Yankees should get concerned. So I think addressing the pitching outside of Cole should be a really important stress for the Yankees. And then the hitting's got to heat up. I mean, you got the guys that should be hitting. The problem is that they're just not.
Right. So the Yankees did lose today. They're now at 5-7. They lost 4-5 to the Blue Jays. Walk-off homer, as you mentioned. Like you said, I agree. The rotation outside of Cole is not just a problem. It's a glaring one. There is a Marcus Stroman quote about the Yankees, and he acknowledged, he said they've got Cole, and Cole is real good. And outside of him, they have no one else better than me. Just that rotation outside of Cole's the ace, and he's not just an ace. He is elite. However, he can't, he can't buoy the whole ship on his own. I think the rotation is full of guys who have a high ceiling, but also a low floor. And right now, you're not seeing those high ceilings get achieved, making it difficult to have production across the board that you're confident in and proud of. The guys just haven't looked great. Uh, to bring someone up in particular, I want to know how you felt about Kluber's play. Some people are concerned, some people are encouraged that he looks really great in the first inning. But then, the other side is that he seems to fade out a bit after that first inning. How does Kluber's play make you feel so far just throughout the season in these first 12 games?
Yeah, I think the thing that really concerns me about Kluber thus far is just his inability to get past the fourth inning in these games. I know the Yankees are probably a little safe with him, and they don't want to get him too much past the pitch count, but he was a guy that used to go 7-8 innings back in his prime. And when you bring in someone like Kluber, you're hoping he can get you 6 innings, really, so you put less of a stress on the bullpen. But if he can only go 4 innings for you, and then maybe at worst case scenarios, he's going 3 innings and change, that's a really big problem, because then you're going to have to piece together the final 5 innings with the bullpen that has had problems this year. So I feel like if Kluber really wants to get in the groove, he's going to have to start going more in the strike zone and try more balls on the ground, and especially in Yankee Stadium, that's going to be key for him. So if he can do that, then there's a lot of upside to a guy like Kluber, but we have not seen that from him yet. So there's definitely concern, and he's a guy that should be the third guy in this starting rotation, but I don't think he's a fifth guy on a lot of contending teams right now.
Right. I understand that. I agree. The concern about him not being able to get through games is valid. The starts are nice, but you'd like to see consistency as well. You spoke a lot about how it's going to take time, but the Yankees have some different kinks to work out up and down the roster, just if they want to get the team right and have themselves playing at the level that they think or know that they can. What particularly, what moves were you thinking? Just thinking now off the top of my head, whether it's putting LeMahieu at first, or how do you feel about that? Just what do you think could help them get to a better spot, and how much do you think it could help realistically?
Honestly, I think the outfield is a big question mark. I think that when Brett Gardner is one of your best hitters, I think that says a lot about how offensively you're struggling. I don't think he should be an everyday starter, but he's hitting better than Hicks. He's been hitting better than Frazier. So I think the ideal outfield would be Hicks in center, Frazier in left, and Judge in right. But you have no other choice but to start Gardner if he's got the hot bat. I think there's also problems in the infield. I think that Glaber struggled defensively at shortstop, and I think maybe you tinker with the defense and try to work it so that he's not the starting shortstop. Maybe LeMay goes to first, maybe Glaber goes to second, but I'm not sure if you have enough infielders where Urshela stretches to short. I don't really see that. So I think there's definitely question marks there. Ideally, in a perfect world, Didi's still a Yankee and he's our shortstop, but that's gone,
Right.
and he's a Philly now.
Yeah, my Mets are playing him.
Yeah, so I
Right.
mean, he's good for the Phillies, but the Yanks need to find their shortstop or a guy that can work with Glaber in the middle infield. So I think
Right.
there's a lot of questions. I think most of them will be worked out on their own. I don't think the Yankees should be in a rush to go out and get somebody at this time, especially for the offensive side, because on paper, when you're looking at the team, there isn't many places to improve. I mean, all these guys that are in the lineup were proven guys last year. They just can't
Right.
hit right now. And when they're getting hits, it's with nobody on or nobody on runners in scoring position. So that's just an unlucky thing, or just maybe it's a problem with the hitting mentality with runners in scoring position. So there's problems there, but I think those will work out. It's really the pitching that the Yankees need to focus on and hope that turns around.
Gotcha. You brought up going out and getting guys. I wanted to play that angle in regards to both New York teams, actually. I'm of the opinion, I agree. I think both of these squads could take the time and just work their own issues out, and could end up being fine. However, I think the Mets might be looking at the deadline to, potentially see what's out there. The Yankees always in conversations for names. You know how it goes with New York sports teams. Um, were there any acquisitions you had in mind, but for the Mets and then for the Yankees, just a guy who could come in and be a key contributor? I've been thinking about Chris Bryant for the Mets. Um, I think that's just someone who they could end up bringing in eventually at not too high of a price and who could contribute for sure.
Yeah, I think that that's an interesting question. You mentioned someone like Bryant. That it's clear that the Cubs are trying to deal someone like that. I'm not sure if he's a perfect fit with the Yanks, but with the Mets, I do see him fit in there and helping them offensively. He's been cold this year. He hasn't been hitting great. Him and Rizzo have both struggled. That's played mightily, but for the Yanks, I don't really see a lot of guys that they could possibly bring in. I thought that there was pitching options for them to possibly get in the offseason, but I think they passed on the chance to get a lot of guys like Odorizzi that I thought were good starters. And I think if you're the Yanks, if you bring in a starter and he's not great, then maybe you're giving up prospects. And you've also got two guys that potentially are going to come off injury soon. You got Severino and you got Debbie Garcia, who's in the minors right now and has not pitched great. But if he starts to turn things around, both those guys could be in your rotation come end of the year. So I think for now, if you're the Yanks, you stick to Kluber, you try to work with him, and you stick to the guys that you brought in having faith in. Montgomery's shown signs of promise, but there's still time for the Yanks. I don't think you hit panic mode and trade for a starter right now. But if a couple of weeks roll around and there are still problems on the mound, then that's when you start to look for guys.
Gotcha. And the crosstown team, how imminent do you think, or not imminent, just how glaring, how necessary is a midseason acquisition for this Mets team? You think we got to give them a little more time to feel things out, or is there a position you think that they should definitely look to go out and upgrade?
You mentioned Bryant. I think that's an interesting play. I think third base, definitely they could go out and get a guy. Outfield is another interesting thing. I think Dominic Smith is a great hitting player, but he's not really an outfielder, and Nimmo's not really a center fielder. So there's definitely ways you can improve the team, but I think they're in a good position right now. And I think Steve Cohen is looking towards free agency to bring in big guys and sign major deals. So I think he might wait till next year's free agency and wait out a year to see, all right, what are really the holes? This is my first year here. Let me see the team that I just brought in with Lindor, Carrasco, and let's see how they work together. And then after the year, or maybe even at the trade deadline, then you reevaluate it. But I think at the current time, at right now, neither team should scramble and make a trade that is going to alter their lineups. I think it's too early for that. And I think Steve Cohen if he's going to spend money, I see it more in free agency next year than at the deadline this year.
Right. Well, Carrasco, you mentioned, hasn't played, and he was a part of that trade with Cleveland. So, he's been struggling with injury. You're right. I think the Mets are in a spot where they can afford to take some time to evaluate how they feel about their roster and just where they want to go. It's been a great conversation about the MLB. Mike and I will have you covered in regards to the NFL, voluntary workouts, the NFL draft, the NFC East, Julian Edelman's retirement, but not before we touch on the NBA, some local news, checking in, and on the Western Conference contenders, as well as some of the top Eastern teams. Next up on One Nightly, brought to you by WFUV Sports. Of course, we will be back soon after this. Welcome back, everybody, to One on One Nightly, presented by WFUV Sports. I'm Chris Persianen here with Mike Calamari and Alex Walls, our producer, putting everything together behind the scenes. We just wrapped up talking about both the Yankees and Mets here in New York and are now on to the NBA, but not before we check in on another New York team, the New York Knicks, up 53-52 against the New Orleans Pelicans here at halftime. The Pelicans without Lonzo Ball, the Knicks without Mitchell Robinson. So both teams a little shorthanded, but the Knicks with a small lead here at the half. They are just coming off a 3-0 stretch, 3-0 run on their home stretch, Mike. And I have to say, I'm feeling pretty good about this team after that home stretch. I am a Knicks fan, so I am coming from a bit of a biased perspective. But it's tough not to be in love with this New York squad. I mean, they are, I believe, 28-27 as of right now, just playing their hearts out every night. They have an all-star, Julius Randle, who was born out of the fire of hard work. I mean, Tom Thibodeau, Randall, RJ Barrett emerging as a young star in his second season. This New York team just has a lot going for it in a year that was not supposed to be a positive one at all, projected to win 21.5 games by odds makers. This New York team just wasn't going to come into this year and make any noise, according to the analysts, but they've proven us wrong. They've proven me wrong. I did not think they'd be this good. And they're sitting now in position to make the Eastern Conference playoffs. I wanted to get your read on the Knicks just so far this year in regards to how you feel about them when we do get to the playoffs. Do you think that they are kind of a result of a weak Eastern Conference record-wise and seeding-wise, or you think this team's got some real fight in it?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a mix. I think this Knicks team is young and they show a lot of promise, but the East is undeniably the weaker conference. I mean, the 28-27 record is still the 8th seed in the Western Conference, but there is a bunch of teams with under 30 wins in the playoff hunt right now. The Celtics have 29, the Heat 28, Charlotte 27. So in the West, none of those teams would really make the cut. And if they did, it would be as just an 8th seed, not as a 5th seed like the Celtics sit at right now. The Knicks team, they still impress me. I think Thibodeau's done a great job with the young core. He's playing guys a lot of minutes, which you really have to like. And you got to love the progress RJ Barrett's made this year. His free throw percentage has soared up from last year. He's turned into a better three-point shooter. His defense is one of the best in probably the East right now, I would say, for a shooting guard. Definitely a lot to love with this Knicks team, and you're excited to see what they can do in the playoffs. At the moment, they sit it with a play-in game with the Pacers, so that could go either way, and you got to hope that they can take a win and move on. But either way, it would be exciting to see them in a 7-game series in the playoffs, and if you're a Knicks fan, that's the win in itself.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm incredibly excited as a Knicks fan for the potential of the playoffs, just this team having fought its way up from the bottom of the standings in just a year to where they are. it's really, really fun to watch as a fan, to be honest. It's a really, really fun season. It's the result of a lot of hard work from the players, the coaches, the front office in terms of putting the team together. It's just it's been a long time coming for this Knicks squad. They, as I mentioned, are dealing with the injury to Mitchell Robinson and Nerlens Noel now, who did not play tonight. Taj Gibson started in his place. That's an injury I forgot to mention in earlier. But speaking of unfortunate, injuries in the NBA, I can't help but think about Jamal Murray of the Denver Nuggets, who just suffered that ACL tear last night. I mean, terrible news for the young guard. He came out and showed in the bubble why you bet on guys with primary upside. I mean, he was knocking down shots from above the break and just looking like a baby Dame Lillard out there, to be honest. For him to go down in a year in which Jokic is having an MVP caliber season has to be incredibly frustrating for Denver and their fans, and especially for Murray himself. You just hate to see it. But, unfortunately, an event like this does have an impact on the landscape of a conference, on the playoff picture in the West, the Nuggets being a team that's always up there in these last few years, in regards to just teams that you have to watch out for come playoff time, teams that can give you a fight. I wanted to run a little game. I wanted to have a little game of buy or sell to see how you're feeling, how I'm feeling, honestly, about some of these Western Conference contenders. I just want to go down the list of standings, to be honest, go down the Western Conference standings and just get both of our reads on these teams, these potential contending teams, and whether we're buying stock, selling stock, or holding what we've got in them in regards to their ability to be in the finals and potentially bring home that Larry O'Brien trophy. So I want to get started with the team in the number one seed. They're 41-14 with a near 75% winning percentage. The Utah Jazz, led by Quinn Snyder, Donovan Mitchell, Rudy Gobert. How are you feeling about the Jazz this year, Mike?
It's hard not to buy this team, and I think a lot of people are gonna have the hot take to sell them because they're number one seed, and that's gonna be it's a fun take, and also because they don't have a guy like LeBron or they don't have a guy like Kawhi Leonard, who is probably going to solely take over in the fourth quarter. But I think this team is built, of course, for the regular season, but it's going to be a hard team to knock off come playoff time. Donovan Mitchell is a proven leader. He's a closer. He's the guy with the ball at the end of the game. And then there's a bunch of pieces around him that are going to get them to that place. You have Mike Conley, who's progressed very well this year. He had a okay year last year, first year in Utah, but he's definitely shown a lot more this year. And you also have Rudy Gobert, former Defensive Player of the Year. So there's a lot to like about this Jazz team. It's hard not to buy them, especially since they're fourth ranked in defensive rating and third in offensive rating, and they're first in net rating. So all those numbers point to a team that you got to love heading into the playoffs. So I'm going to buy the Jazz.
All right. Well, I'm going to take the opposing stance. I'll do it. I'll go against the seemingly unbeatable Jazz team. This Jazz team reminds me a lot of the Denver Nuggets in years past. Denver Nuggets, before they had Aaron Gordon and Jamal Murray, who was healthy, and Michael Porter Jr., they had Jokic. They had this great talent, and they had other nice talent on the roster, but come playoff time, they just didn't have a primary ball handler, a primary initiator of their offense, who, when the floor shrinks and push comes to shove in the playoffs, you need a bucket, you need a stop, you need a leader in the locker room. They didn't have the guy. They weren't there yet. Jokic is learning how to become that guy. He's much closer now, and I honestly think that, if Murray weren't unfortunately injured, the Nuggets could have done some damage in the playoffs this year following their acquisition of Aaron Gordon. However, in regards to the Jazz, with Donovan Mitchell as their primary ball handler, I can't be too confident in them. And that's not against Donovan Mitchell. It's just acknowledging that he's still in an early stage of his career. And I don't think he's good enough to be able to carry the amount of the offensive load that he would have to, because their second best player is Rudy Gobert, who's not particularly a force on offense. So I will be selling the Jazz. I had Jazz stock, but I think now is the time to sell it when the record's as great as it is. Next up in the Western Conference standings are the Phoenix Suns. Now, I'm someone who owns a lot of Phoenix stock. So my stance on Phoenix is going to be hold. This is because I came into this season incredibly high on Phoenix. I am a Knick fan, but I'm also a huge Devin Booker fan. I was incredibly high on what Devin Booker, given a second star in Chris Paul, could achieve this season. And it just seems between Booker, Paul, Ayton, the growth from players like Mikal Bridges, that this Phoenix team is for real. I think I'd take Phoenix over Utah in a 7-game series. For that reason, I'll hold my Phoenix stock. But for anyone else who wasn't as high on Phoenix, I'll give it a buy rating. What about you, Mike?
Yeah, I'll go with the buy rating as well. I mean, they're 9-1 in their last 10. I think Chris Paul has shown that he is one of the top 15 players in the NBA still, I think, especially when you put him on a team where he can really be the primary ball handler and lead them in the locker room. So I think when you add a guy like that to a team that already went 8-0 in the bubble, like you mentioned, and Devin Booker and Aiden and a bunch of young talent, I think it's hard not to buy a team like this. I'm not sure where they'll land in the playoff picture. I think between them and the Clippers, that would be a hard-fought series if that's what it comes to. But I think there's a lot of teams in the West that you're going to want to buy. Personally, I want to buy almost all these teams. They all are playing great basketball right now compared to the East. So the Suns are just another team that I'm really confident in heading into the playoffs. And I think with Chris Paul at the helm, they're a team to beat.
Phoenix, man, when you've got those 3-and-D guys that are as good as the ones they've got around two players like Booker and Paul, I think you're in a good spot. I really think you are. And they have Ayton as well, as I mentioned. I just love that Phoenix squad. Next up, third in the standings at 38-18 are the Los Angeles Clippers. Personally, they just acquired, man, I gotta buy this Clippers stock. They traded Lou Will for Rajon Rondo. Rondo is a player like Kawhi Leonard who just seems to not care about the regular season and then really cares in the playoffs to the point where he can impact the series significantly. So Kawhi Leonard is a guy who can win you a series. Rondo can really impact one. I love that acquisition for the Clippers. They gave up Lou Will, who's someone who wasn't great for them, but is good for Atlanta. It just the trade worked out. The Clippers are a great three-point shooting team. I loved the Ibaka pickup for them in the offseason. I'm buying Clippers stock.
Yeah, I think the Clippers are great. They're 6 straight, and they have 8-2 in their last 10. But I will sell the Clippers. I'm yet to be seen on Paul George in the playoffs. I feel like that is a very normal take. A lot of people are in on that he is not a playoff player. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying I'm yet to see it. I doubt Kawhi is a vocal leader for that team. I think bringing in a guy like Rondo helps that, but I still think that it's tough for a guy to come in at the trade deadline and then take hold of the locker room. So I think for those reasons, it concerns me. I mean, if you look back on all the teams Kawhi's been on, Toronto, Kyle Lowry, he was the head of that locker room. He was the vocal leader. San Antonio, Tim Duncan, Tony Parker, vocal leaders. I think Rondo could be that guy, but when you bring in someone late and they're not cultured into the organization, that presents a problem. So I'm yet to buy on the Clippers. I would sell them right now. They are one of the hottest teams in a lot of power rankings this week. They're coming in at number 1, but I'm yet to be sold on them, so I'm going to sell.
That's a fair take. Next up, it are the Nuggets. I think we're both unfortunately going to be selling stock in the Nuggets here because of the loss of Jamal Murray. So, I loved the Aaron Gordon acquisition for them. I thought it was a good trade before I even found out that the pick was protected. So I definitely thought it was a good deal for them after that. I just think it's tough to buy or even hold stock in this team with Murray being out. I can get holding if you really think Jokic can be that good, but the West is so cutthroat, I'm going to have to sell.
Yeah, I'm with you, Chris. It's tough to buy a team that just lost their primary ball handler and one of their leaders, a guy who carried them throughout the playoffs for a lot of those games. I mean, you talk about that Utah series and then that Clipper series. He was the guy who was hitting the big shots late in the game and putting up 40-plus point games. So when you lose a guy like that, it's hard to see a team as good as they are making it past the first round, or if the first round, getting into the conference finals. So unfortunately, it's another team I'll have to sell.
I want to get up next to a team that I am going to be loading up on stock on, the Los Angeles Lakers. LeBron James, news just came out that it might take him a little bit to get back. That's okay, because having a healthy LeBron by the playoffs is worth it. So for me, I understand that this team's not going to be doing incredibly while both LeBron and AD are out. The stock is low. I'll load up on it now so I can own a good amount of it by the time their two guys are back, because I really think the Lakers are still in a good spot as legitimate contenders. How about you, Mike?
Yeah, I think the Lakers are a team you have to buy. I mean, any team with the healthy LeBron, you're buying to make it to the finals, if not the conference finals at the very least. So I think with a healthy LeBron and then Anthony Davis healthy, who has struggled offensively at times this year, but is probably the front runner for defensive player of the year had he not gotten injured. So I think when you've got those two guys and then you bring in Andre Drummond, who is going to destroy any team that doesn't have front court that like the Nets, I think this is a team you're going to buy to potentially win it all if they're healthy at the start of the playoffs. So I'm buying the Lakers, and it's going to be fun to see them get into this Western Conference playoffs.
And really quickly, the 6th seed, Portland Trail Blazers. Personally, I love Damian Lillard, but I can't buy stock in the Blazers just with how competitive these other teams are going to be, like the Jazz and Suns come playoff time. So I will unfortunately be selling the Blazers despite loving Dame time. How about you before we wrap up this NBA segment?
I think everything logically points to selling Damian Lillard and the Portland Trail Blazers, but if they end up drawing the Clippers in the first round of the Western Conference Finals, I'm going to have to pick them and I'm going to have to buy them. I don't think it's the smart pick, but with Damian Lillard ball hands against that team, I would 100% hope they come out on top. And listen, I think
there's an upset in the cards.
I do think it's a possibility when Damian Lillard gets going, when CJ McCollum gets going. Those two guys are hard to mark defensively. I don't think Rondo's able to keep up with Lillard. I don't think there's anybody on the Clippers team that's going to be able to keep up with them. And you add CJ McCollum to that, I think it's going to present some problems for the Clippers. Obviously, the Clippers have problems of their own, but if the series is shootout and it goes to game 7, anything can happen with Lillard. So I'm interested to see what happens, and I'm going to buy the Trailblazers to win at least one series in the playoffs.
Gotcha. I like that take. Mike and I will be back on One-on-One Nightly, presented by WFUV Sports, with NFL analysis and coverage with some general sports news and notes after that. Right after this break. We'll see you then. Welcome back, everybody, to One-on-One Nightly, presented by WFUV Sports. I'm Chris Persianen here with Mike Calamari and Alex Wolves, putting together everything behind the scenes. We're here back now to talk about the National Football League, NFL. Mike, we have some news regarding workouts, vaccinations, even a signing. So some different notes to get into. I wanted to get started with the voluntary workouts. We have teams like Tampa Bay, their players deciding that, because they held each other accountable last season to complete off-season workouts and just put in the work needed to have a successful season, that they are not going to be coming to in-person voluntary workouts this year. They'll be doing them from home as they were last year, due to the COVID protocols. I think this is fine. I think, this is the players putting their foot down, saying, listen, we don't want to report for this. We made it work. Let's do it again. I do think we are in a position now where COVID leniency might be a bit larger of an issue this year than it was, I know last year when it was being taken quite seriously by these teams trying to prepare for their seasons. But now with, the vaccination getting rolled out as well, we're in a better spot just in regards to the virus. So fine with me that the players are willing to hold each other accountable and themselves accountable so that they can spend extra time with their family back home and still be in shape to report to camp.
Yeah, I think it's there's definitely nothing to say bad about it. I think that it's good for the league that players take initiative and willing to work on their own if they're going to be safe doing that, and it's going to put the team at safe so the whole team doesn't have to undergo a quarantine or such if one player tests positive. I'm all for it, and I also think it's good that they're taking initiative on it and they're coming together and deciding, listen, this is what we want to do going forward. So good for them, and hopefully they'll get back on track come mandatory workouts.
Yeah, I agree with you. Just as you said, it's good if the players want to just take the initiative and get it done. I'm here for it. So, no ill notes in regards to the voluntary workout attendance. I did bring up the vaccination rollout. The NFL has taken pretty much the strongest, the most strict, the most loud stance on vaccinations out of any major sports league so far, Mike. We're seeing most leagues come out and present the vaccine as an option, as a recommendation, as a suggestion. The NFL is requiring top-tier personnel to be vaccinated if they want to be working with players. I think this is a positive sign that we're just heading towards a world where people are vaccinated and able to work in person and help restore a sense of normalcy I do think it's interesting that the NFL is the only league to have taken such a strong stance, and the fact that requiring a vaccination is a strong stance in itself. But I don't mind the NFL stance, and I think it's a productive one in regards to, like I said, restoring that normalcy and getting in-person workouts back on track. How do you feel about this stance by the NFL? Or rather, how does the kind of lack of a stance by other leagues make you feel?
I think it makes sense that the NFL took this stance, mostly because their season will be starting come September, come October, and there's a reason why they're requiring it, because by then everyone should be vaccinated by that point, is what they're thinking. I think for teams like NBA, their season started in December, and MLB just started, so they had shorter timetables to get everyone vaccinated. So I think that mostly is the reason. I think if you MLB or NBA, let's say hypothetically, had both started at the same date, NFL would, I think you would have seen similar stances. But it's going to be interesting as we get closer to the next seasons, like the NBA, what their requirements are, and NHL by next season, what their requirements are. So those definitely will be interesting. But I think the NFL did a good job having these requirements, and hopefully it does the best job of keeping everyone safe.
Yeah, I agree. It's a quite peculiar situation to be in if you're any sports league right now. We're seeing leagues just, around sports be in positions where they're trying different things out. The NFL taking this stance works for me. No complaints here. We did have a signing as well in our last little bit of news here for the NFL. The Arizona Cardinals brought in James Conner, his first workout with the team, and he signed on the dotted line before leaving. So a 1-year, $1.25 million agreement for Conner, presumably to potentially be the goal line back there while Chase Edmonds soaks up the rest of the usage. I think we're at the point in James Conner's career where you can't label this a needle mover. You can't label this move one that will really change things or shake things up for Arizona. But I do like it. I like Conner as a player. He's not a top tier running back, but to have as an option with just in your running back room, works for me alongside Edmonds. Can't be too upset with a move like this. I don't know how you're feeling about the acquisition, but not a huge deal in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that the Connor move, I don't see him getting much time in Arizona. He struggled with injuries throughout a majority of his Pittsburgh career. He only had one healthy season, really, where in his credit, he was a dominant running back, over 1,000 rushing yards, rushed more than 8 touchdowns. So he was definitely a dominant runner in his time in Pittsburgh when he was healthy. I think he battled injuries all throughout last year and the year before, and that really affected his ability to succeed as a player. So I think as he gets older and now he goes to Arizona, I don't see him anything more than potentially a third down goal line back that mixes it up and gives the defense a different look. And I see Chase Edmonds making a big leap next year, Fordham zone Chase Edmonds, hopefully taking a leap and getting 15 to 20 carries a game and being the lead back for Arizona.
Yeah, I again don't think Connor will have a huge involvement, but a good move just at the cost to bring him in. On the topic of teams adding players to fill needs, shaping out their rosters here as we approach the start of the NFL season, as you mentioned, I wanted to touch on some news that came out regarding my favorite team, the local New York Giants, just in regards to who they might be looking at with the 11th pick. And then maybe just get into how you're feeling about the NFC East in general going into this year. Devontae Smith, Jalen Phillips, edge rushers, wide receivers, a couple different names came out in connection to the Giants. So, not too much to say now. We don't know who's going to be on the board. We don't know exactly who they're targeting there at 11, but the sentiment is being shared amongst people familiar with their thinking that wide receiver and edge are two positions receiving a ton of attention from the scouting department, and are also two positions of need for the team. They just brought in Kenny Galladay, but they have no strong edge rushers and could still use a long-term investment at wide receiver. How do you feel about that 11th pick there for the Giants, and who you think they should target?
Yeah, you mentioned wide receivers, you mentioned edge rushers, but I'm going to go outside those two positions. I think Rashawn Slater is a great pick out of Northwestern. He sat out 2020, but in 11 games as an offensive lineman, he allowed 0 sacks and 1 quarterback hit and only 5 quarterback hurries. I mean, absolutely dominant for them in 2019. I think he's one of the best offensive linemen on the board. After him, there's a big drop off, and I think if he's available, that's the guy you're getting if you're the Giants. The best way to help Daniel Jones succeed is to give him protection. I think the wide receivers are going to figure themselves out. I say that a lot, but I really do, especially when you bring in Kenny Galladay. I think it's hard to say that we're going to bring in another wide receiver and then we don't even have the line to protect our quarterback. So I think that's really the most important thing for me if I'm the Giants front office is getting someone to protect Daniel Jones.
No, that's fair. I think Slater's receiving a lot of buzz. I think the Giants might not have him as an option there at 11.
That is very true,
Carolina,
yeah.
Carolina, a team that might scoop him up before the Giants are even on the board. But no, he'd be a good option there at 11. You can move him around the line, and there's just a lot of possibilities there. I wanted to touch on some teams around the division. Just you can pick which state we head to first, Mike. But just wanted to get your thoughts on some of these other NFC East teams, some of their glaring positions of need, and who you think they might be looking at, even just positionally in the draft.
Yeah, I'm a Pittsburgh fan, so I think it's only right we head over to state first and we go to a neighboring city in Philadelphia. I think that they have a lot of interesting things going on. Of course, there are talks about a QB, but with them trading back, I think that there is not going to be a QB drafted for them. I think they're going to stick with Jalen Hurts, a guy with over 1,000 passing yards, 6 passing touchdowns. He also ran for 354 yards and 3 TDs, all in 4 games started. That's a pretty impressive stat line, and it's got to make you confident. There's also a little worries around Hurts. How he handles the ball, 4 interceptions. But I think how you help that is if you go out and get a wide receiver like Devonta Smith. I think if he's on the board, he's someone you're going to take with that pick. It's hard to pass up on a guy who was that dominant in college. And I think if you don't go in that route, I think you go get a guy like I mentioned, Slater, if the Giants end up passing up on him and reaching for a wide receiver edge rusher. So I think you got 2 options if you're the Eagles. Your offensive line was not good at all in protecting Carson Wentz. And Jalen Hurts had a little more success because he was a scrambling quarterback and he can move around in the pocket. But I still think that's also a need. But if Smith's there, I think you get him. But if the wide receivers, the top 2 guys are gone, then I think you go get an offensive lineman.
Yeah, wide receiver. I like Waddle a lot too. I think he's a great prospect. Someone the Giants could use for sure. He would be great alongside Galladay. Let's head to Dallas next. Dallas could use some defensive help for sure, whether it's edge or a cornerback. I think just either of those 2 positions are where they should be looking. Gotta bring someone in to either put some pressure or help in the secondary. To be honest, that defense was real bad last year. How are you feeling?
Yeah, I think that defense definitely struggled. I think that you really want to get a guy who's going to put pressure on the quarterback if you're the Cowboys. So I think a guy like Jalen Phillips is a great pick out of Miami. I think he's a guy you can go and get, and he's one of the top 2 edge rushers in the class. So if he's available at your pick, I think you get him. If not, you still got to stay defensive. So I think maybe a guy like Patrick Surtain, cornerback out of Alabama, he's a guy you look at. So I think those are the 2 guys potentially, but it's really going to depend on who's there for the Cowboys, but it's definitely defense.
Yeah, defense is the absolute side of the ball that they need to look to get some help on. If Dak's going to be back healthy, I think their offense is going to be in a good enough spot. I just think it's going to be in a place where Prescott can facilitate things and get the ball moving easily enough. Zeke hopefully can have a bounce back here. They're going to need some defensive help. The last team, the nameless team, the Washington football team, up last. They seem to have everything in place, but a quarterback, man, they've got a great team. I know they could use another wide receiver probably. I don't think they need to look on day one though. They seem to know how to get some good value out of that position later on in the draft. If Washington could get a player like Lance, that would be incredible to have him develop and then get to play with that roster because they just have so much talent there. Their front seven, their D line, and that roster in general. That defense is a monstrosity to go up against. I think if you can get a quarterback that's above average, under center in Washington, you can be in a great spot if you're the football team. How are you feeling about Washington going into the draft?
Yeah, Washington is I'm very mixed on. I think their defense improved so much over the course of the year, and they're one of the best defenses at the end of the year. And they gave Brady a lot of problems in that game. I mean, come fourth quarter, Brady was still putting up points on the board, but for a majority of that game, they were stopping that Bucs offense. And I think that tells me that the problem isn't with the defense, and you look for somewhere on offense. I think a wide receiver would be great. I don't think you trade up if you're Washington to get one of the bigger wide receivers, but I like a guy like Kadarius Toney out of Florida. I think he's a definitely interesting pick if he gets to Washington's pick at 19. QB, I'm not so sure on. I think you'll wait out and see maybe if you get a late round flyer or if you work with the guys you have now, because I don't think you're going to get as good of a QB as you can at 19. Maybe you look for a guy like Trask later in the draft, but I'm not sure if he's a guy that's going to be ready to start week one. I think Taylor Heineke is going to be interested. He was just extended by Washington, and he looked really good in that postseason game. Definitely small sample size, but you get rid of Alex Smith and you re-sign Taylor Heineke. Maybe they see him as a potential guy who can win them games in 2021. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do. But if they're going to go out and get something, I think offense, wide receiver, get your team some weapons.
Heineke isn't a guy I'm huge on, but
big on that train.
but I think you're right that if you do have a lot of pieces in place, someone like Heineke could still put together a good season and have you in a decent spot as a team. He could hold you over for sure. So maybe not the guy of the future, but an option for sure. Absolutely, no doubt. Again, as I said, Washington got a good team all around. Just looking for those couple last pieces to plug in before they can really be in a contender spot. The NFC East though looks like it's on the way up potentially as a division from being just so clearly the laughingstock of a division to the rest of the league to being
very true,
a little more competitive, a little more serious of a division. Just thinking about my Giants, a team we went up against a couple times in the Super Bowl. Julian Edelman announced his retirement. New England Patriot through and through. Of course, the debate was sparked instantly as to whether or not Julian Edelman's recently ended career, is worthy of a spot in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Now, Edelman is eligible for the class of 2026 based on when he announced his retirement. But there's some skepticism as to whether or not he should make that class of 2026. Mike, I got to know where you stand on this. Is Julian Edelman a Hall of Famer?
I think when there's guys that are fan favorites and you love, this conversation always comes about. But I don't think Julian Edelman is a Hall of Famer in any stretch. I think something that's really interesting is how social media handled his retirement. We go to Bleacher Report, for example. In their post, they talk about no scholarship out of high school. I'm reading it right now. Kent State QB, one college catch for 11 yards, no combine invite, 7th-round pick. And they list all those as accolades. And although impressive that he was so unnoticed coming out of high school and college, that he worked his way to a 3-time Super Bowl champ and Super Bowl MVP, that although impressive, those don't get you into the Hall of Fame. What gets you into the Hall of Fame is how you were in the NFL. Julian Edelman was one of the most outstanding players in the NFL when he was playing. He was a reliable player for Brady. He was your solid guy who was going to get you 4, 5, 6 catches a game for sure. But there was never a time where he was a top 15 wide receiver in the NFL. He was never going, weird way to compare it, but he was never going top 60, top 70 in fantasy football drafts. And if you're an offensive player and a wide receiver, he never put up the numbers that I think would warrant a Hall of Fame spot. And before I finish my soapbox right here, I think there's a lot of places with Hall of Fame. You see this in the MLB, you see this in the NBA. There are good players that are not Hall of Fame players. Ron Guidry is the type of guy who is in his prime, great player for the Yankees in the 70s, pitcher, not a Hall of Famer. Don Mattingly, same thing. He had 4-season stretch where he's one of the best hitters for the Yankees. 2 Yankee examples, but fan favorite players that just weren't Hall of Famers. And I think Julian Edelman in the NFL is a guy like that, who's just a great player, but I don't see him as good enough for the Hall of Fame, and I don't think it's that close.
I agree that Edelman just doesn't have the case. If you're going off of regular season stats, which, you know, I think is in a super unfair pool of stats to pull from, Edelman has less career yards than Jeremy Maclin. He had less career receptions than a guy like Michael Crabtree. Less career touchdowns than a guy like Pierre Garçon. Edelman had the luck, kind of playing with Tom Brady. Now, yes, Tom Brady loved playing with him because he was very good and he was hardworking. And Edelman has had a lot of those playoff stats helped out by just being along for the ride with Brady. And even then, fewer career receptions than Roddy White, including playoff totals, fewer career touchdowns than Dwayne Bowe, including playoff totals. I just don't think the case is there. As you said, Edelman, he has a Super Bowl MVP, fan favorite, and he's been with Brady. You know, that's going to get you that boost in the media, that notoriety. Everyone's going to know who you are, and they're going to know that you did damage to their team at some point, most likely. However, it's just obvious that different positions have different impacts. Brady, man, Brady's that guy, and Edelman's a great player, but the Hall of Fame is supposed to be that top echelon, that top tier of guys. And I personally don't have Edelman in there. So even though we might see Edelman add to his career resume with Rob Gronkowski, noting that there was a 69% chance that Edelman would join them in Tampa Bay, I don't think even then that he would be at the point in regards to his resume where I'm comfortable just saying he's a Hall of Fame caliber player. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't. But that just about wraps us up for our NFL discussion. Mike and I will be back on One-on-One Nightly with WFUV Sports after this to talk about some general news and notes around the world of sports. Of course, our producer Alex Wool is tying everything together behind the scenes. Mike and I will be back after this. Welcome back, everybody, to One on One Nightly, presented by WFUV Sports. I'm Chris Persianen, back here with Mike Calamari, just to talk about some general news and notes around the sports world, touch up on the signings, the topics that we did not touch on so far throughout our segments regarding the MLB, the NFL, the NBA. Mike, I wanted to get started with an NFL signing. The Cleveland Browns made an addition to their roster today, bolstering their defense a bit, adding an edge rusher to play opposite of Myles Garrett, a number one overall pick formerly, and another former number one overall pick, Jadeveon Clowney, now a Cleveland Brown on a 1-year, $8 million deal with another $2 million available in incentives. What was your reaction to this signing, Mike?
Yeah, I didn't see this coming that much. I mean, I knew the Browns were going to be aggressive this offseason, but I didn't see Clowney coming to Cleveland. And now that he is, I think it's going to be it's going to definitely bolster that defense, a defense that was at times good, at times not good. Browns got into themselves a lot of shootouts last year. The Ravens come to mind where, I mean, it looked like Baker and Lamar Jackson were going back and forth, and the defense didn't have answers for the Ravens. So when you bring in a guy that's going to give hell to the tackle all night like Clowney, you got to be excited if you're the Browns front office. You got to be excited if you're a Browns fan. So I think it's a great move for Cleveland, and it just makes that division that more interesting. Talk about Baltimore, talk about Cleveland, talk about Pittsburgh, and you talk about Cincinnati with Joe Burrow, which are obviously the last team in that division, but with the healthy Joe Burrow, who knows what happens. So
and that first round pick that they're going to have to
exactly
to add to that team there.
So it's going to be interesting how it rolls out, and I think that just adds to the competition that division already has.
For sure. The prospect, of course, of having two former number one overall picks heading at the quarterback every play is great. But of course, there's a reason that this number one overall pick was available for, a $10 million contract. Clowney has bounced from spot to spot the last couple of years, just kind of being a guy that you can get to be your edge rusher for a year. The Browns now will be deploying him opposite Garrett. He'll be in a better position to succeed for sure, but I'm just not incredibly confident that this signing will have the kind of boom that you might expect if someone were to tell you that, two edge rushers that were both picked number one overall recently are about to be working together. It's all about how you view Clowney as a player, though, because I think the Browns are in a spot where if you have enough trust in the player they're bringing in to fill that role, that as a team, they'll be able to put together a solid 11-man effort overall on the defensive end. But overall, I think the Clowney signing is a good one for Cleveland. I don't think it's one that will end up being a complete overpay. It's just a question of whether or not it'll be worth it to have paid up for someone like Clowney to play against or to play opposite Garrett rather. And I think we'll be at the end of the season talking about how it just might be working out. That kind of talent, I think you can get something going. Elsewhere in the sports world, heading over to the NBA, we have a shift in ownership. So the Minnesota Timberwolves will have a new group of governors. The New York Mets were the talk of the town for a bit in regards to investing in sports teams. Alex Rodriguez went in on the Mets with J-Lo. They're no longer together, of course, in huge sports news, but the A-Rod going after Minnesota and now being an owner of the team is obviously something to talk about.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think it's shocking Minnesota is the place he is going to be the owner of. It's not a big market, and what it makes it think is that A-Rod might be trying to move to a place like Las Vegas or potentially Seattle, who's been aching for an NBA team ever since the Sonics left. So I think both of those places might be likely destinations A-Rod looks to shift this team to. It's going to be interesting. Maybe he sticks in Minnesota and he just tries to build a dynasty there. It's also interesting because Kevin Garnett was in possible contention to buy the Timberwolves as well. So there's definitely a lot that goes into this. And if you had told me A-Rod was going to be the owner of the Minnesota Timberwolves about a week ago, I would say you're crazy. So it's very interesting that we're here now. And I'm interested to see where he takes his franchise in the next 5 or 10 years.
Listen, the Timberwolves really only have upwards to trend in. I mean, this organization has not been run incredibly well the last few years. Glenn Taylor, current ownership, just haven't been able to put out a product on the floor that has been genuinely, truly competitive since they had Jimmy Butler and Tom Thibodeau just for a playoff run there. Again, with players like Anthony Edwards, Karl Anthony Towns in the building, you're hoping that this team can put together, an exciting enough team where moving out of Minnesota isn't in the question. However, I think a potential move to Seattle is absolutely in the cards for now. I do think the NBA might look to expand before they look to move teams, though. Speaking of Anthony Edwards and Alex Rodriguez, did you see that Anthony Edwards didn't even know who Alex Rodriguez was?
Shocking.
I thought that was hilarious. They asked Edwards, how he feels about his team's new owner, and he doesn't even know who the guy is. it's very Ant Edwards. Ant Edwards has this hilarious personality off the court where guy's just a goofball. I think he's real funny. I love Ant Edwards, man. Easy player to root for. Tough upbringing, tough stories growing up, but he's now in a spot to succeed, and he's got a lot of talent. So I'm rooting for him. I wanted to transition sports one last time, especially, before we wrap up tonight's show. And I wanted to give you a chance, Mike, to run free here and just let it all out. Because I know that baseball's a weird sport, man. It's a weird sport. And the thing is that it's beautifully weird. It has these odd intricacies and rules, and that's what makes it so baseball and so perfect. So I know that you are a baseball purist. You are someone who does not enjoy rule changes, and you like preserving the integrity of the game. I've got to hear your thoughts on what's going on with the Atlantic League, Mike. They're experimenting potentially with some rule changes, and I've just got to hear your take.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm the WFUV baseball purist. My brother graduated, was the former WFUV baseball purist. Both of us get excited about issues like this. I mean, when I first saw that they were planning on instituting these rules, I mean, the Atlantic League is a breeding ground for testing new rules. I mean, you go back a few years, they had the not drop third strike. It was a drop third strike, but on any pitch, where pass ball on a 1-0 count, batter could steal first. So it's rules like these where I just question the sanity of the people owning MLB, the Rob Manfreds, that think that these are going to help gain the viewership. I think it's shocking. And then the most mind-boggling rule is the one to push the mound back. And it's insane because just because guys are throwing harder now, that shouldn't change the distance of the mound and the measurements of the game. I mean, guys are jumping higher than they've ever jumped in basketball. You don't raise the hoop. You don't tinker with the game just because people are getting stronger, faster, they're throwing harder, they're jumping higher. And I think it's insane that they think they can get viewership this way. And I think if you asked any baseball fan, they would tell you this is crazy. It reminds me of the runner on second rule that's instituted right now. I mean, it has lost teams games, and fans have been not understanding really why this is a rule. I don't think any fan has liked this rule, and I don't think anybody who wasn't a fan of baseball is a fan now because they put a runner on second with nobody out in extra innings. I don't think anyone sitting on their couch watching the NBA or watching cartoons and never watched baseball in their life was like, oh, they pushed the mound back 2 feet. I'm going to go turn on a baseball game now. So I don't understand what the motivation is if you're trying to grow the game when you say it out loud, it's obviously a small rule change like that will never do anything to change the game. So I really think it's crazy. Maybe, Chris, you have a different point of view on it, but when MLB tinkers with changing the rules of the game, I'm just shocked that they think that's going to be the way to get viewership when they should just try to make the game they have already more entertaining for fans to watch.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna just come down on your side here because of the injury factor. So moving the mound back, I just don't think it's necessary. I think there's a lot of room for the MLB to grow in regards to how it markets its players, how it markets its talent, how it puts together advertisements for the game, for the product, for merch. I think the NBA and the NFL have got it down, and the NFL is working on it now. We see them putting in a potential rule change to allow players to wear more jersey numbers. I believe that's a ploy to have their most marketable players, guys like Derrick Henry, be able to wear numbers like number 2. I think the MLB has a lot of room to grow in terms of the media aspect, how they promote the game, and how they market their product. And if this is, a look to build popularity, I absolutely agree with you that people who are watching other sports instead of the MLB are not about to change their minds because of a rule change like this. However, I do think you can get a whole lot of new viewers by better marketing the already incredible talent you have around the league. Um, there are sports leagues like the WNBA who also have trouble marketing their talent, and the WNBA doesn't have the same kind of coverage that the NBA gets on ESPN. The MLB, I think, is a bit of the same way. You can have ESPN analysts talking about how what LeBron ate for breakfast it is going to have an impact on his playoff run that year. And a WNBA player could make an incredible charitable donation and no one would know. MLB guys, it's always said Mike Trout could be in the middle of Times Square and no one would recognize him. Like, I think the MLB has a lot of room to grow in regards to how they market their individual talent. I think they have a multitude of talented players that the average sports fan just doesn't know about, that they would love to learn about and just don't know about. Again, a lot of room to grow for the MLB, and I don't think that I agree with them in terms of rule changes like this being how to approach it. I think a better alternative, a more productive solution would be to look into how they're marketing their product, how they're trying to advance the promotion of the game, because they have a great game. They have a great product. Baseball fans love baseball, and I think it's about trying to create more baseball fans as opposed to trying to bend baseball to potential fans. I can't think that you'll find an effective outcome, an effective solution that way. I think just taking what you've got and showing it off would be more effective.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And you talk about marketing the players. I mean, talk about a guy like Tim Anderson, who's been a top 5 batting average guy for the past couple of years. And he was unknown to MLB fans. I mean, guys who really follow the MLB knew Tim Anderson for a while, but he was a guy that flew under the radar until the past year or so. So you got to get guys like that who are young, talented players playing in big cities out there, and people should know about them, baseball fan or not. And I think everyone knows Tim Anderson now. He's one of the best hitters in the MLB candidate. MVP candidate, sorry. But it's like those kind of players, like you said, that MLB needs to work on marketing better. That's what they should be focusing on, not these silly rule changes.
Yeah, I agree. I think baseball is a beautifully weird sport, as I said earlier. and that there's just a lot that the MLB could do with the guys they've already got. Mike, if you've got nothing else to add before we wrap up here, I want to thank all the listeners for stopping by, tuning in tonight to One on One Nightly, presented, of course, by WFUV Sports. For Alex Woles, our producer, putting together everything behind the scenes, we thank him as always. For Mike Calamari, joining me tonight as a host of One on One Nightly, we thank you all for tuning in. One on One Nightly, again, is a production of WFUV Sports, and thank you again for stopping by. Have a nice week, everyone, and don't forget to check out the Saturday edition of One on One on 90.7 FM.